Good day. Welcome to this special video interview commemorating 6 decades of AFM River of Life, Commersdal. In this heartfelt conversation, we delve into the remarkable journey of Pastor Fred and Auntie Joan.
The church is having a big celebration on the 3rd and the 4th of August. Tell us about it, Pastor Fred.
There's a saying, if you have a dead past, you cannot have a living future. And that is why we're celebrating 60 years of the existence of this local church, now called River of Life Community Church, but its original name was the AGS Kleerling Gemeente in Commersdal. We later changed it to AGS Commersdal Assembly. But now we have so many churches, like 14 local AFM churches in the municipal area of Windhoek, that we have to identify our churches now by way of giving them names. So the name is River of Life Community Church, and that is what we're celebrating. We're also celebrating 60 years of Joan and my walk with Christ since 1964. Joan started when she gave her heart to the Lord on the 18th of April, 1964. She led me to Christ in East London under a tree on the 21st of May, 1964. So it's just about a month apart. But we're also celebrating the mother church that we served in and who was our mother church in Parkside, East London in the Eastern Cape. It also was established in 1964. So these 360 years are celebrated on the 3rd and the 4th. On the 3rd, it will be a gala dinner at the Windhoek Country Club. And then the next day, on the Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we will have a big worship and celebration service here at the local church. And it will be followed with a meal for everybody. That's the reason for the 3 celebrations on the 3rd and the 4th of August.
Thank you very much, Pastor Fred. Before we continue, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I was born in a place called Seymour in the Eastern Cape. It's close to the town of Fort Beaufort. It's a very small place, really. My father was, his first position as a school teacher was there. And then we moved they say I was young, 1 year old when we moved to a place called Makazana, which was also part of the Congregational Church, like a mission station. There was about 20 to 25 families who lived there. My father was the school teacher, the principal at the time. I started schooling there when I was 5 years old. And it was also a small community. I think there was 2 or 3 teachers. And then when I was 11 years old, my father moved to a place called Butterworth in the Transkei. And he was again the principal there. And I was in standard 4 when we moved there. And that's when I met Joan at school. I mean, she was in standard 3. She was 10 years old, I was 11 years old, and we were just a small community, small school, about 50 learners in all, and the primary school up from SEP A at the time, which is now grade 1, to standard 5, which is now grade 7. And after that, I went to Maria Low High School in Queenstown for standard 6. Joan went to her uncle's school in a place called Nleleni, deep in the Transkei, and he was for her standard 6, and then to John Bissiker in East London, which was the high school. She led me to Christ, as I've said before, on the 21st of May 1964, and I started like preaching some of it from day one, felt the passion, the feeling, because I was involved with 2 missionaries, Mr. Oosthuizen and Mr. Duvel, who had a mission station on the Wild Coast area of the Transkei, but they used to come into town for provisions, and then they would have a meeting in a little hall in the colored area, which was called Singeni. The word Singeni means a place of thorns, because there was a lot of thorn bushes around, and that was the Xhosa name for it, and so on. So we lived there, and Joan and many other families lived in one yard. They called it dip yard or tip yard. There's still some controversy whether it's called dip yard or because it was deep into the yard where they were living. But it's also where people used to, when they fall apart after they've been drinking too much, we call it tip. Yeah, so there were also that culture there and so on. But Joan's father died in 1956. At the same year, we moved. They moved in September. After her father passed away, the mother packed up and she went back to the Transkei where she came from. The father died in Klerok, also in the Eastern Cape. He was a master chef. And when he passed on, there was no life for them because mother wasn't working at the time. So she had to move back to her family in the Transkei, and that's where we met at school. And that's where it all started, he's nog 'n jong kind en 'n raakie verlief and so on. So we had that experience. And later on, we worked in the same area, and we became boyfriend and girlfriend. And from there on, when she led me to Christ, I started a church in Butterworth. We were about 16 to 20 of us meeting together, mostly her family and my family, but other families came in as well. My closest friend, who's been my friend from day one, when we moved to Butterworth, Ansley Jacobs, he later became a pastor as well. So we've known each other from 1956 already, and he tragically died in 2021 of COVID. So we were close, very, very close, all these years. When I became a pastor, he became a pastor. I studied also theology for about 2 years.
Pastor, you were called to ministry. What was the processes to enter full-time ministry, and how did you get involved in AFM ministry?
Because Joan, when she moved to East London, she met Pastor Skeffers, and a close friend of her, she had been schooling together, invited her to a meeting in a house in Parkside, East London. And she had no clue what she's invited to. And she only found out there that it's the Apostolic Faith Mission, where it's now just started. And there were about 10 of them together with Pastor Skeffers. And at that house, she gave her heart to the Lord on the 18th of April of 1964. And when she led me to Christ, right from day one, I had this passion to share the gospel and lead people to Christ. That was very important to me. It was just a passion. I was young. I didn't know everything, but I was sharing the gospel to the extent that I knew about it and so on. But people came to the Lord as a result of that. Because of these missionaries that were in my life, I had a passion for souls. I had a passion for preaching. I had a passion for reading, because those years in the Pentecostal churches, people were just encouraged to read the Bible and not other books. But these people had a Bible college also at the mission station, and they had books, because Christian books were not very easily available those years as they are now. And so, but I had I developed a passion for reading at the time. And so I was preaching the things I was reading, but I was also connected to radio stations. The radio station was called World Evangelism, and it wasn't allowed to be broadcast out of South Africa because of the apartheid system. But Manzini in Swaziland, I could listen to A.A. Allen, T.L. Osborne, Oral Roberts, and many other American preachers. So I learned a lot just by listening every evening to shortwave radio that was broadcasting out of Manzini in Swaziland. So that was almost my schooling right from the start, as I can say, yeah.
Pastor, tell us about your first church, your ordination, your appointment, and your placement.
After I completed my studies in 1966, so when I wrote my first exam in dogmatics through the Bible College, AFM Bible College in Johannesburg, Auckland Park, the white college, because there was no colleges or training facilities for colored, black, and Indian people in the Pentecostal churches. So we had to study through the white college and distant schooling. And you write, you study one subject, you write it, and if you pass it, you go on to the next one and the next one. And that started in 1966, after the birth of my first child, when Nadine was born. And then I went on to study further in East London under Pastor Skeffers. I did my probation there. And from probation, then when the church now see that you are equipped well enough and you pass the tests, then you are going for ordination. I was ordained in 1969 in Port Elizabeth during the December annual AFM Coloured Conference that was held in a place called Galvindale in Port Elizabeth. And then we were placed in Graafrenet a month or 2 months later in February 1970, and that's when I started. Small place, didn't know the place. The total income of the church was there was about 10 people or 20 people, could be more, not very active. It used to be a bigger assembly at one time earlier, but things had gone wrong, and that's the reason. I didn't know they're sending me into the lion's den, really, to start something, And but being young and ambitious and having a passion, you don't see trouble, you just see potential, and that's what we saw. And the two of us were very young. I was 24 years old, John was 23, and we had 2 children at the time. Nadine was born, and Glenn was born at the time, and John was still expecting the third child. He was born in Graafrenet, Ricardo. And then I bought property. When I bought property, I had 33 rand in the bank in the church, and I started buying cement. We bought the land and we started building a church. It took us 13 months to complete the church from foundation to the roof. It was paid in cash, and we had the official inauguration of the church during Easter in 1973. I lived there for 13 years, and I started building churches in other areas, planting churches in the Karoo area of Johnsonville, Pearston, Somerset East, Murraysburg, Middelburg, Cape, Noupoort, Graafrenet. We expanded. I had this passion and this drive, and I also birthed in the hearts of my assembly that passion for souls. So many of them are in ministry today, and they're very successful in what we're doing. And we lived there, and we left the place on the 9th of January 1983 when we moved to Windhoek.
Pastor, you also played a role in social upliftment in politics. Tell us about that.
It was something that I was pushed and pulled into. I started reading newspapers seriously when I was 16 years old, and I was attracted by reading the Daily Dispatch, and the editor was Mr. Donald Hoods, very known Donald Hoods. He made a documentary about Steve Biko those years, so he's internationally known, Mr. Hoods. So I read about his politics and his understanding of the system of apartheid. Although I grew up in a house, my father was very active, anti-apartheid, big time. He never subjected himself to the system of apartheid. He was always resisting. So he grew up in that culture. So for me to read politics at the age of 16 already was just a natural thing that happened to me. I could see the injustices. And that was pulling me into getting involved in the lives of poor people who were oppressed. So when I went to Graafrenet, you couldn't have found a better soil that you could grow yourself in politically because of the poverty of people and living way below the breadline and the oppression. People were earning like 5 rand a month, working from like 7 o'clock till 7 o'clock in the evening in homes of white people. That pushed me into getting more involved. So the 13 years I was in Graafrenet, wherever my children went to school, I placed them in different schools. And I was elected as chairperson of the school parents board on all these schools. So I controlled what was happening, school boycotts and consumer boycotts and things like that. I was involved in all that as a result of that. It's more social involved in politics, because our whole lives are influenced and involved from the day you were born. In my time, you were born in a black hospital. You would live in a black or colored township. You would go to a colored school. You would go to a colored church. Your whole life, from your day of birth, you are even buried in a cemetery that were allocated for colored people. So this was so there was no way for anybody at my time to escape from what was happening within the political field. There were laws that were instituted at the time of my life. I was 5 years old when racial classification was introduced in South Africa. I can remember it as it was yesterday. People were loaded into trucks and taken to capitals where they were taking photos of them and so on. So that was politically my experience, and I was born into that. So it just went on from there on.
So then you were called to Commercetown. What moved you to accept the call to come here?
Berenice, thank you for asking the question. In 1977, I was part of a group of young people in South Africa from the AFM Church, who now, as an outreach, we went to outreaches to different towns and cities in South Africa. But in 77, we decided to come to here, to Namibia. It was called Southwest Africa at the time. And we were about 200 in all, came from Cape Town, Johannesburg, on the Eastern Cape, Bloemfontein, Durban. It was during the school holidays of 1977. We moved. We actually slept in this building. It was small at the time. And then Pastor Donald Bester was a pastor, and he was building the house, the place where he lived in, and it was almost completed, so we used that facility as well. We pitched a tent where the current youth center is standing next to the church. That was used. We had a tent pitch there. And Joan and I both said, if one day we get a call to this country, we will accept it. In my 13 years of tenure in Graafrenet, I had 14 calls from 14 different churches in South Africa. I never accepted. Number 15 was this one called to Namibia, and that is the one we accepted at the end of 1982, when we were given the call to come here. We accepted, and then we moved the end of 1982 and the beginning of 83 to Namibia, to Windhoek, Namibia.
So what was you and your family's experience in the then Southwest Africa?
I came with this, as I already explained my experience with confronting a system of apartheid. And I came here with that conviction also, that I would not only get involved in the colored and Buster communities as the pastor, but also as the chairperson at the time of the district, meaning all the colored churches. I was a chairperson at the time of all the colored churches. That would not only be my mission. My mission would also be to see whether I can help in educating people politically away from the system that was now very strong. This country was divided into 11 ethnic groupings, and there was 11 administrations. It was heavily divided, and that to me was an issue in terms of how can we unite So I used the church, this platform, to preach against the sins of apartheid. And that has helped me a lot in having an ecumenical outreach to other churches outside the Pentecostal realm into the mainline churches like Catholic, Lutheran, Congregational, and other churches. It was very active against the system of apartheid and so on. So that's how I landed with the Council of Churches, just as an observer. But they received me with open arms because no Pentecostal churches were part of the Council of Churches because the apartheid system was very, very active and prevalent in the Pentecostal churches at the time. So that was my initial experience. But I felt, again, getting involved in the schools, in the colleges. I was with Ella Duplessis, David Besaidnout, involved with Gamam's Primary School at the Commersdal Teachers Training College, Concordia, and so on. So I felt I needed to spread my network and my involvement in all these places so that I can influence learners and students at that level against the system of apartheid, to think in terms of liberation.
Thank you, Pastor. Now, I'd just like to go back a little bit again. Pastor Donald Bester was your predecessor. What role did Pastor Bester and Sister Eileen and the children play in this AFM Commersdal congregation?
I've known Pastor Bester and the family since the early 70s already, 71, when we had a conference in Cape Town and so on. My first experience with people from this country was when a pastor representing Suidwest Africa Kleerlinkerk at the conference in Cape Town in 1965. That was the only voice we heard from this country. And then 10 years later, the South African Church sent a delegation in 1974 to Namibia to come and scout and see what the situation is here. Nobody has had any information about the colored communities in this country, other than maybe the university or the Western Cape, where students came there, and also the colleges like Dower College, OKSK in Oudtshoorn, and other colleges in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. But as a church, we didn't know much about what was happening within the colored community, bastard communities in Namibia. So when all that happened, Pastor Donald Bester was part of the delegation who was sent here in 1974. He moved here with his family in 1975. At that time, the church was not well structured. Pastor Bester was very, very good in structuring and putting a system in place, how the Pentecostal church, and especially the AFM, as far as its doctrines and its systems operate. So when I came here after Pastor Bester, it was a well-organized, well-established, and well-structured church. Although it was small, but I found a very solid foundation when I came here. He came here in 1975 with his family. He left in mid-year, June 82, and I followed up 6 months later in early 1983. But his legacy was that he built this house, Cash, that I lived in, belongs to the church, and as I say, he was very involved in community as well, in schools and all sorts. And he and his children lived there. His family lived there for how many years? 7 years, I think.
How did the AFM Commersdal become a River of Life community church?
There were three reasons why I asked the church to rename it River of Life. First of all, we are close to a river called the Gamams River. And that river can also be called a river of death because so many people have drowned there. That was the first reason. Secondly, we use Ezekiel 47, 1 to 13 as the reason when the Bible says that from the altar a stream was flowing out of the temple, and it was like ankle deep as it flowed out of the temple. But the further it went, like knee deep, and then waist deep, and then as deep as you can swim. So it says then this river was a river of life, because there was a lot of fish found in this river. And even if it runs through the marshes, it gave life to the marshes. It then eventually went into a delta system that went into the sea. And the Bible says that the whole climate changed in that area, and they could found fish that was not in the rest of the same ocean at that area, because of the life that this river was giving. And I said, a church, a river does not does not reach the sea, cannot be called a river. A church that does not reach the world cannot be called a church. So we are a river of life flowing out of this building and giving life to the community outside there, as far as the gospel is concerned.
So Pastor, River of Life played a role in planting churches
Yes.
and sending out missionaries. Tell us more about that.
I felt my first responsibility was, first of all, is to break this thing about racial exclusivity, where this church was just colored and buster-like. And because of the political system that was dividing people in different ethnic groupings, I felt I needed to cross the border into Karatura. And we assisted there with the building of the church in Karatura. I used this church and the people from this church financially and physically to assist with the building of the church in Karatura, so that we have that type of cooperation. And unity must start on church level first before we go into the rest. So that was our first project. And then secondly, we moved into places like Gubabas, where we planted churches, the one in Nosselville and the one at in the other township, Ipikirud, I think there's a place called. And then in Marienthal, we were involved. Before I came, Pastor Bester planted the church in Rehoboth and built the church there. So that was already an established church that also had its foundations from this church. And then we assisted with Naraval, we assisted with Mondesa and Tamariskia. And then eventually, further north, like we built a church in Ushakati and assisted with Katima and Rundu and places like that. So we were involved quite a bit with planting churches away from this local church. Because at the time I was elected as the first president after the church was unified, because the church was divided into three groupings, black, colored, and white. And it was part of my struggle to unify the church. And we succeeded in that on the 21st of January 1991. That is when the AFM church in Namibia was unified.
The construction of church buildings needed funds. Can you tell us about the organizations donating to the cause in Namibia and the role that you played in it?
Yeah, we in 1989, I had a visit from Covenant Ministries of the UK, headed by Dr. Bryn Jones. And he was very impressed in what we were doing here, because at that time, this building behind us, the youth center, was under construction. They assisted us financially to do that, even to upgrade the men's, the church house. That was upgraded as a result of that. They also sent us 8 volunteers. And with those volunteers and the money that they gave, we built the Oshakati church. And we assisted with a Sunday school or children's care center in Rehoboth, next to the Rehoboth church. Pastor John Hess was involved. I introduced him to Bryn Jones and Coventry Ministries, Covenant Ministries, and they assisted with the building of that center. And the Oshakati one, this hall here. And then there were other people also, business people in the community, business companies really, like Arc Trading And also the embassy of Canada, Canadian embassy, they contributed towards the building of some of our structures. But most of this building was actually the local church who funded the expansion of this building.
Pastor, you previously touched on your role and involvement in the National Church, the CCN, and other mainline churches. But would you like to elaborate on your involvement and with these organizations, and how you made a difference as the local pastor in uniting the church in Namibia?
One of my first moves when I came here was to find church leaders who have an understanding of liberation and the freedom and so on. Because in the Pentecostal church, this was a no-go area. In most, we were towing the apartheid line with resistance, but not vocally and not active. And that's why I was looking forward, and I found there was this council of churches that were based in Karatura, and it was mostly the mainline churches who were involved, who were participants and members of the council of churches. So I went and introduced myself and shared a little bit about my black consciousness experience and the fact that I believe in non-racialism. And the bishops there received me with open arms. And I became the voice of the Pentecostal church in Namibia, in the Council of Churches. And I changed the thinking and the mindset of many of the mainline churches because of my position and my stand. Because we were like fighting doctrinally against, using baptism as a major thing. That's why we're different. We cannot meet because, we don't baptize the same way. We baptize by way of immersion. They baptize by way of sprinkling. And also the manifestations of the Holy Spirit. We believe in the laying on of hands and healing and speaking in tongues. And that was a taboo for them. So these things were actually the reasons why we could not meet. And I said to them, let us agree on the things that we agree on. But the things that we disagree, we don't make an issue about that. So I could work with them, and that kept me within the movement. I was there. I was very welcome there and exposed to a situation where I've never would have been. I even went on missions outside the country, sent by the Council of Churches, and my involvement during the independence was very marked involvement in terms that I served on the RRR, which was an organization that was organizing the returnees from exile and their reintegration into the Namibian system. Because some of them have been out of the country for 30 plus years. Some of them were born, the exiles, were born outside of the country, and they didn't know this country as well. So I was part of the RRR organization that was the reintegrating and for the reestablishing of people here in Namibia.
Since you've been pastoring this church for the last 41 years, how different is the church, in your opinion, in the last 10 to 20 years?
The church is not disconnected to what's happening in the world. So as things are changing outside of the church should also adapt and we cannot. It was the Pentecostal churches are known for being very conservative in terms of how they dress, how they act, and not participating in sports or anything that look like worldly things and so on. But things have changed, and we had to also adapt to the situation. We have to change our method of presenting the gospel, but never change the foundation in terms of what the Bible prescribes as repentance, the importance of becoming a child of God. Those principles we should never move away from. but the church have to adjust. So the church, our local church, have also adjusted. Just a simple thing. You see that we have chairs in the church. Chairs were introduced by Pentecostal churches because mainline churches would have benches and things like that. We would have a band in the church playing guitars. That was a taboo in the mainline churches and so on. So they influenced us in terms of accepting a lot of things, and we influence them by accepting some of, because you find in many churches, especially in Commersdal, where most of them have also a full band now with playing all sorts of instruments that never used to be, just an organ and so on. Psalms and gesangen, but now they also sing choruses like we do.
Pastor Fred, your next birthday, you'll be turning 80.
Yes.
How do you see your future and the future of the AFM Commersdal congregation?
I've been thinking a lot about retirement, and my perception of retirement is that old people sitting on a veranda waiting for death to come and take them away. I can't get my mind around that I will be doing nothing. So I think I'll always be involved in some way, but to a diminished responsibility. Currently, our church is running in many ways without me. Even the office, I come in for about an hour. Sometimes I even skip a day. I don't even come in for the hour, just oversee things. But I have staff running things at the office. I have people in the youth that are doing their own thing, the children's church, the ladies ministry, the prayer meetings that we have, our financial system. These things can operate without me. So in a sense, I don't know if I'm phasing myself out. I'm not sure yet. But 80 could be a date or a time where I maybe feel that, no, I think the time has come. But I'd like always, as far as my physical, my condition allows me to, and mentally, I can still make the difference between Paul and John and Mark, and if I can still make a distinguishing between those personalities, and I don't get confused and so on. But I've also told my wife and some of the children, if you see me doing that, please call me to a halt and says, ek dink jy moet nou ophou, jy is nou oud genoeg. So I think, but for now, I'm still going on, and this celebration is major to me. Really, it's something very, very major to me. That I can have still my wife and children involved, that I can have my grandchildren, great-grandchildren involved, because they will all be part of the celebration. That is something that is dear to my heart, and I love people, so being away from the church, it doesn't overwhelm with me. I need to be amongst people. I'm a people's person, and so on. And also, I love telling stories. And if you have a story to tell, you have nobody to tell it to, then it doesn't really make any sense. So I'd always like to be involved, but to a lesser extent as time go forward, and as long as the Lord allows me to.
And how do you see the church going forward without you?
Yeah, it's difficult. I have been to Graafrenet, and things didn't go well when I left, and the church split up in different churches. But all those people are in one way or another still related to us, and some of them will be here with the celebration and so on. But they started their own churches because the leadership who took over then was not doing very well. So you don't know. But my philosophy, as far as that is concerned, even if a church breaks up for the wrong reasons, God still get the glory. The church is seen almost as a body. The only way your body will grow is when cells within your body breaks up and they make other cells, and that's how you grow physically from a baby. A church also needs to sometimes just break up and form other churches. The Bible is very clear in Acts. Then when there was a lot of persecution against the church split up in many parts, and everywhere it landed, it started new churches. So many of the people who left us during my tenure here, has started new churches, and we're still very well connected to each other. And I think even like yesterday, I still had a meeting with someone who has another church, but we influence each other positively. So I hope that this church can go forward. They can change things because new leaders will have new visions and understanding. They don't have to be thumbprint or my same identity, but if it can grow. Currently, we have a good crop of people that has the right spirit to be part of this church, and not if anything goes wrong that they will just leave the church. I hope and I don't see that happening.
Okay, thank you, Pastor.
Pastor Fred, as Auntie Joan also played a big role in our current church, her current position as the mother of the church, and how is she doing?
She had been very involved in, I could say with great honesty, without her, I wouldn't have been sitting here today. Especially with the ladies, now this is from Butterworth now, to East London, to Graafrenet. She's been involved in the youth, in the Sunday school, in the ladies' ministries. When I had to go to Cape Town for 3 months from Graafrenet to complete my studies in 1979, she was running the church as a pastor. She did very well in Graafrenet. At one time, she had a following of ladies in her church up to 200. In a Sunday school of 350 kids. She had a youth movement of more than 100, as I said. And then also she was doing the choir in Graafrenet. When she came here, she was also involved in the ladies, not in the Sunday school, but only in the women's movement. She was very involved. They went on camps. She was very, very involved. Without her, I wouldn't have been sitting here today. She played a major role in the church. But she has had physical challenges for a number of years. She had major operations. And as a result of that, physically, she's not that active and involved anymore. But she's doing fine. She's most of the time she's home and so on. She goes on holiday with me whenever we go, and she loves the outworld. When we had the 4-wheel drive vehicle, she used to go into the desert with us. We would just sleep in the desert. That's so we're romantically very, very close and so on. Sy sê altyd vir my, Fred, gaan preek vir jou gemeente, maar nie vir my preek nie. Because if it's in you to be that type of person that you keep on teaching, she will say, okay, gaan preek daar vir jou eie kerk ons met. But she's fine. She's fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
As we draw the curtains on this remarkable interview, we find ourselves inspired by the enduring legacy of Pastor Fred and Auntie Joan. As we celebrate 60 years of AFM Commersdal, let us carry forward their torch, knowing that love and service remains the heartbeat of this congregation. Thank you for joining us in this celebration of grace and devotion. God bless you all.